we are going to have a show coming up where we're going to show a viral clip we posted a couple of weeks ago that goes into asking the question, can Gen Xers understand Gen Zs? And the reason why I find this topic quite interesting is because I don't have a Gen Z. I have a Gen Alpha, an 8-year-old. And the way she communicates as she's been in public school more and more, I find very interesting and very different, so different than the way I was raised. I mean, she wants to talk about her feelings a lot. I never talked about my feelings. My parents could care less about my feelings. She wants to talk about a lot of detail about what happened during the day. I think that's awesome. I actually want to hear the details of what happened. My parents could care less about what happened during the middle of my day. We didn't have like these in-depth conversations and discussions. And then she's trained to learn more about her feelings from a chart that they have to examine whether she's angry or sad or upset or embarrassed, and they're trying to help kids identify their feelings on charts. And that is also so foreign to me. And I'm at the tail end of being a Gen Xer. I was raised by boomers, baby boomers, and I learned more about the boomer generation by reading a really interesting book called The Fourth Turning, which examines the generations and the changes in generations and the big societal changes that make the generations the way they are. I don't plan on getting into total depth about that big, huge topic. But the boomer generation is interesting because that was like the fourth great awakening. If you look and examine the 1960s, that was when people were looking at the world in a much different way than their parents looked at the world. And when you had the hippies come out and you had the psychedelic revolution and you had this change of consciousness. And if you look at the way music changed from the beginning of the 60s to the end of the 60s, like the beginning of the Beatles, I think their first album was We Are the Beatles. And then you look at like the end of that generation where I think their last albums were Sgt. Pepper's Revolver, Abbey Road. I mean, just the music change was so dramatic and the societal change was so dramatic. I think the boomers generation were kind of self-obsessed with the changes of finding their own enlightenment, and that's common among boomers. And so their kids were just sort of go free range, figure out the world on your own. You get hurt, get back up, wash it out on your own. Latchkey kids was a common phrase used with my generation. And I think it's like when you communicate with fellow Gen Xers, you kind of can easily get on the same wavelength because you kind of had that similar way of examining the world through your parents' eyes and the way you were raised and a lot of independence. But then when you talk to Gen Zs, it's very different. Like they have a whole different way of communicating. And this clip I'm about to play you that went absolutely viral on our Instagram really demonstrates that difference in a better way than I've ever seen before. So I'm going to play that clip for you now. And I think you're going to like it.
Mr. Marquez, I'm sorry to interrupt class, but it's actually super triggering for me to be reading a book about a disease right now with everything I'm going through.
Because of everything you're going through? What are you going through, Kayla?
The rest of the class sort of already knows about this, but recently I was successfully diagnosed with something called...
You're doing great, Kayla.
It's okay.
Be present with your illness, okay?
Asymptomatic Tourette's.
What?
So what Tourette syndrome is,
No,
right?
I know what Tourette syndrome is.
Oh, great. Okay. So it sounds like you're halfway there and you're taking an opportunity to be educated, which is honorable.
Thank you.
So asymptomatic Tourette's, right? It's like Tourette syndrome with the tics and like the hardship, right? But without any symptoms. So in its way, AT is harder because...
What is AT? Oh, asymptomatic Tourette's. Okay. Uh-huh.
It is harder because people have like actually no idea the battle that people like Kayla are fighting inside every day.
It's a silent killer.
And someone actually diagnosed you
It's
with
disrespectful to ask that. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. You can't blame people for making really huge mistakes when they haven't learned the etiquette. It's only self-diagnosable.
I see. Elsie, what's going on?
Mr. Marquez, I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry that it wasn't centered and you couldn't see it very well, but if you get to hear it, you got the gist of it. Kayla was successfully diagnosed with asymptomatic Tourette's. I looked it up. That's an actual thing. And apparently, you know, a lot of kids I found who are, and this isn't all of them, I found from our comments, we have over 600 comments on this, so check it out on Instagram when you get a chance to read the comments. I want to read a few of them if I can pull those up. But a lot of people say their kids are not like this at all. But I think where it happens is with kids who were raised on the belief that psychology provides all the answers for your problems. And I think psychological diagnoses, I don't take them very seriously, but apparently a lot of kids and parents do. I think, and I'm probably in the minority, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, I think kids who have ADD and ADHD, I think that's the norm. I think every kid has ADD and ADHD, and that's a disease of not going outside and playing enough. I think that's the disease of not riding your bike and exercising your body enough, and so you get so antsy that you just need to find a way to find an outlet. And with me today is Scott Brown. Thank you so much, Scott, coming with me, coming on the program.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, and you're actually, scheduled for a follow-up episode we're doing, but you've got 4 kids, is that right?
4 kids, 4 girls.
4 girls, wow. Yeah. So you have girls that are entering college or that have entered college. Can you identify with this clip at all?
I can, for sure, and I can identify with your reaction to it, which is that if you were to ask me what I thought of it even 6 months ago, I think I would have landed in your camp, which is, I don't know, is ADHD really a diagnosable disease and is impacting my kids? I think I've shifted. And so you mentioned my oldest. My oldest is preparing for college, senior in high school. And, I think that part of the language that they're speaking is a language that I've had to learn. I speak Russian. I learned Russian. And I remember when I was learning Russian for the first time, nothing made any sense to me. It was a continuous stream of nonsense. And it was really over the course of time, there's these little sound sweeps within any language that you start to hear as you hear it over and over again. Mm-hmm. And your brain is able to parse out those sweeps as it gets used to it. And so over the course of weeks and months, I start to hear the little sweeps in Russian, and I can start to understand the language bit by bit. And I think over the course of the 18 years with my daughter, I've had to learn her language. Mm-hmm. And I only think that I started to get semi-fluent in it, call it 6 months ago, where I finally am like, I get what you're trying to say to me. And one of the things was that she was trying to say something is not quite right in my brain. And we finally listened, and we finally got her into some doctors, and she was diagnosed with ADHD. And me just understanding that shifted my understanding of her language.
Yeah.
As I started to read about it, it shifted. And, I've got points of comparison with 3 other daughters that have been very different. And so it's not, to me, just a product of their environment. They've all been raised in very similar environments. Mm-hmm. She is different in a unique way. And I saw it as a problem, and now I probably less so. I can understand her language.
Yeah, and it's interesting you put it that way, because I like our little girl. We spend a lot of time with her, but the more time she spends at school, the more her language changes and adapts to what she's learning there. And you're right, they come back and they're speaking different ways, and they're talking about the feelings, and they're talking about the feeling chart, and I'm trying to get in touch with the feelings. And then she doesn't like it at all when I get angry. Like, and I get angry. I mean, every parent kind of, I think, loses their shit once in a while. And I'm like, okay, then I wouldn't get angry if you didn't misbehave and do the things that are wrong.
Yep.
And she, but you're really, really angry, Dad. I mean, you really gotta. And I'm like, all right, so I'm not supposed to get angry. I got it, whatever. But it's like I was raised by a dad who would just lay down the law. It was very cut and dry. You didn't cross the line. There was no wiggle room there. And I mean, and it's just like, I guess because of technology, the way kids are raised today on their devices, and I just do not want to have my little girl get on social media at all, period. But I guess social media and just being exposed to like a different world than what we were raised in, it is like we have a different language we got to learn, right?
Yeah,
It's
there's this sort of pendulum swing that happens from generation to generation. I think about the way my parents raised me. My mom's most common reframe is, well, at least you're not in Iraq. This is something she still says to my kids today. They don't even know what she means, but it's sort of a just completely a lack of empathy. Toughen up, suck it up, you're fine.
Yeah.
And we've tried to sort of swing to the opposite end of that pendulum, which is we care a lot about what you think and what you feel. And I don't know what the right answer is. And is there some happy medium between the two?
I mean, I do like to hear how she feels. And I think feelings are important, but they're not so important that they need to completely take over your life. Yeah. Like, I don't think feelings should be at the top of the pyramid. I think competency, logic, rationality, critical thinking, those are much more important than feelings. And that's the only destructive part of what I think is happening with this new generation that I see problematic. If you always have feelings at the top of that pyramid, you're always going to bump into the feeling instead of your logic and rationality when you're making a decision. And you're going to say, oh, I don't like that person because I feel like they're a bad person, and that's just stupid. That's a stupid way to look at the world.
Yeah, it's almost like we need to normalize that part of happiness is sadness, because what I think happens with my kids often is I feel sad. How can you make me feel happy? And I want to teach them that feeling sad is okay, and it's actually a part of feeling happy.
Bored is okay.
Yeah, it's great.
Feeling sad.
Yeah.
Feeling like uneasy, unhappy. I think those are natural feelings that you got to kind of embrace.
Essential.
I think the communication of using a device to be the intermediate mechanism between most communication. I mean, a device is now the mechanism in which you communicate to other people primarily. That's kind of a sad development, I think. That's why we do our podcast live. I like to talk to people face to face. I like human interaction that's non-screen interaction. I think we need that. And I think it's troubling how little kids play outside these days. And you said you live in Alpine?
I do.
Scott, did your kids grow up playing outside?
They did. What shifted was that we spent the first 10 years of my oldest daughter's life in Chicago. And we were in the suburbs of Chicago. We did have a yard, parks to play in, but every play experience with friends required the scheduling of a play date. Mm-hmm. And you'd have to schedule that weeks in advance. Mm-hmm. And so there was no sort of impromptu play. There was no, I'm going to walk down the street and knock on Grace's door and see if Grace can play. When we moved here to Utah, one of the reasons we moved was that we wanted to bring our kids back to this sort of childhood that my wife and I had experienced in Utah, which was more free range, which was more of, I'm going to go out to play and I'll see you in 8 hours. Yeah. And we wanted that, and we've gotten that. Literally, my kids will leave the house and we don't see them for 8 hours, and we feel awesome. Complete trust in the community and comfort in them doing that. And so they've gotten lots of play throughout their lives, but the play is different here in Utah for sure.
And so you living in Alpine, that's not weird for the other parents that your kids are out playing, or all the kids are they all playing outside?
They're all playing outside.
Wow,
yeah, it's not
awesome.
Weird at all. You know, it's constant kids knocking on our door. my kids knocking on their door, kids feeling comfortable enough to just walk into our home without knocking on the door, and we've embraced that.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was for me growing up.
Yeah.
And I thought that the neighborhood adjacent to my neighborhood, my street, would embrace that because there's kids there. But then when I said I sent my kids out to free range, it was like, no, this is not. It's a play date type neighborhood, I guess, but it's probably just dependent on where you.
So
live.
you're experiencing that here in Utah still?
Yeah,
the
in
play
Murray,
date?
it's like, I mean, I guess you gotta get to know the parents of the kids before the kids get to know each other, which is kind of lame. And maybe we're just in kind of not the perfect neighborhood, but I'd love to hear from people who are listening right now. What's your experience? Do you find parents are embracing the free range here in Utah? Is it better here in Utah? Is it worse? Is it neighborhood dependent? So if anybody's got any comments related to that, that's a component I'm interested in, because I mean, we're in eastern Murray / Cottonwood Heights area, and I notice kids are out walking together, and that's occasionally they'll play like games together. And a couple of times my kids joined them, but golly, it just seems like if you just had a group of kids out playing on the street, people are going to know to slow down. They could play, kick the can, or these fun games I used to play growing up, just baseball, basketball, soccer, but that's what you found it actually.
Yeah, I wondered if it was extinct, and it's not. In our neighborhood. And maybe it is just the culture of the neighborhood, but we live in a cul-de-sac. My kids play night games. They go out and they play Steal the Flag. It's the stuff that I grew up playing. So it's fulfilling for me.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you shift a neighborhood around that.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I find it interesting, and I find that I find it a little troubling, honestly, that popular psychology and diagnoses are sometimes very useful. I think especially if your kid's definitely got autism, if that is then understood, great. But I think a lot of young kids, this is what we understood when we got our kids. We got kids from the foster care system 5 years ago. They were all diagnosed with ADD, ADHD. They were all being medicated, even the 4-year-old. Yep. And they were being medicated with stimulants.
Yeah.
And I thought, why have a kid being medicated with a stimulant, and it's a amphetamine stimulant. Yeah. It's not that different from meth. And when you don't want to have a kid who's chemically dependent, nobody wants to be chemically dependent. And so we got him off of those. We said we want to have a double check of this ADD diagnosis, and it was diagnosed by a pediatrician, and it wasn't diagnosed through a psychologist expert. And so they said, no, he's not ADD, ADHD. He doesn't need that. He doesn't need those meds. We're going to take him off, and he was just fine. It was just the same as he was before, just tons of energy. Yeah. But yeah, I'd like to hear from you. We're going to be posting this on YouTube, so everybody watching this on the live stream, check it out at YouTube. We'd love to hear your comments. This clip has received 625 comments, almost 1 million views that we have here on Instagram, and it's been shared 23,000 times. It's crazy. So this is kind of what we want to do on this channel: facilitate good conversation, talk about important issues that affect the quality of life here in Utah and the West. And so, yeah, I thank you so much for watching. Again, this is brought to you by Utah Stories. This is our magazine. Our beer issue is about to come out. I was supposed to be here today, but because of the storm, it's held up in Fruita, Colorado. But this is our beer issues over the years. It's a really fun beer/Moab issue. It's going to be hitting the stands tomorrow. You can pick it up in downtown Salt Lake City, or you can subscribe to the magazine for $3 a month, or become a member for $5 a month. In which case, whether you do the $5 a month or $8, you get Faces of Utah magazine, which is a story about entrepreneurs who've done incredible things here in Utah, and that's where you fit in, Scott. You've been on Shark Tank, and we're going to get to Scott's story in more detail, but we're going to take a little break, and we will come back with that in just a few minutes. So thanks for watching.